Welcome to the Kitchen Shrink, where real life meets real talk. We're Kat and Kel, two therapists helping you make sense of relationships, emotions, and everything in between. Pull up a chair and let's sort through this together. Hey, everybody. Today's email is this. I grew up with a very strict dad, and I never really felt like I could do anything right in his eyes. We still don't have a great relationship, and even now, whenever we get together, he questions my choices, and I instantly feel like I'm a kid again, trying to prove myself. I carry a lot of guilt and sadness about our relationship, but I'm also starting to wonder how much my upbringing affected my self-worth and the way I show up in relationships today. I'm in a serious relationship now, and whenever my girlfriend and I argue, I tend to shut down, get quiet, and withdraw. She brought it up a few times, and honestly, I don't fully understand what's happening with me in those moments or how to be more emotionally present for her. Could my childhood experiences with my dad be impacting the way I handle conflict, connection, and intimacy as an adult? And if so, how do I start healing that and building healthier patterns in my relationship? Oh, hey, I'm really glad you wrote in today. That's a great question.
Yeah,
and you can
kind of two separate things here, right? Because he's talking about what it's like when he's around his dad, and then what it's like when he's around his partner, and how intermingled our early childhood experiences are in forming healthy relationships as adults. Right. So I think this is a really good topic to cover today.
Oh, yeah, this is going to be a good one, chock full. So, and you can bet your Birkenstocks there are a lot of other people out there that are feeling the same way and kind of going, I wonder if there's any truth to that for me as well. So I'm really happy you wrote this in. So, you know what I tend to think is that we're all born worthy, And then I think, parents or a parent or a grandparent, maybe even a teacher or an intimate partner, we learn that we're not worthy or that we're not good enough. Like people come along in our lives when we're little and they kind of screw up that innate worthiness that we are all born with. So it sounds like growing up with dad, that his dad was very hard on him, very strict. And, you kind of get this feeling like I can't do anything right and I'm not good enough. And I don't think as a kid, we really realize that, right? Like we're 4 or 5 years old and we have a parent that's, there's a couple of different parenting styles. One is the authoritative, which is, hey, you know what? The answer's no, but here's why. And then there's the authoritarian that is no because I said so. Mm-hmm. And when you have that authoritarian that's really strict, oftentimes that also includes some, constantly criticizing how you do things, that you didn't do it right. And even though it's not about the discipline, it's about the underlying message that we get about ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that can really hang around our whole lives if we don't realize it.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about a little bit before that there's a difference, too, between like who we are as people and what our behavior is. Right. But not everybody in their, unskilled first time on the planet parenting is really good at separating those two things. Right. And so if we don't do a very good job of saying like, hey, that behavior needs to change, then a person can really feel like they need to change because of the behavior when those two things are separate from each other. So that can 100%. Impact self-worth a lot.
Yeah. And you know what? I figured this out later in life. I've got 3 kiddos and I'm sure I stumbled several times with each of them, but how you, at the end of the day, how do you want your child to think and feel about themselves? Because we don't know at that young age that, hey, this isn't about me. This is about however, parenting style my parents have, or maybe their own trauma that they're bringing with them as a parent. Mm-hmm. So as an adult now, I think, man, you want your kid to feel worthy. You want them to feel good enough. And sometimes it's just tweaking our parenting a little bit that can shift that. If we're critical on our kids, constantly wondering, why'd you put that there? Why'd you do that? Kids don't know. Again, like discipline, it's not about the discipline. It's this emotional message that comes along underneath it where we just start to carry this baggage of, hey, maybe it is me. I'm not good enough. I can't do anything right. Oh my gosh. And then you end up as an adult in relationships with people and somebody says, or his girlfriend might say, honey, why did you, put the ketchup on this shelf instead of this one? And your whole inside might just blow up like, oh my God, you freak out and you withdraw because your body doesn't know and your brain doesn't know. Is that right here? Am I responding to something in front of me or am I responding to like my entire childhood of never feeling like I was good enough?
Yeah.
So this guy sounds like he withdraws when there's conflict like that. So I'm glad that we can kind of tease that part out as well and how we carry it with us as adults and what that looks like. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so I think the aha moment for me is kind of how our nervous system, like I said, it doesn't separate childhood conflict from adult conflict as clearly as we think, right? So just the fact that this caller has some insight that I withdraw, I shut down if we start to have conflict, I think, we can tend to do that. And I think a lot of times that could be a very good protective mechanism growing up, right? I mean, if a parent starts to get on you and why'd you do this? Oftentimes kids withdraw because it's no longer safe, right? They can't really share their feelings about something. So as an adult, even though like, hey, maybe logically, I think I'm an okay kind of guy, somebody says something as menial as, why did you put that there? Your whole system might blow up and you can have this huge response. And later you're like, what the hell was that? Why did I shut down on such a simple little question?
Right. And I think this is where attachment theory really comes in, because understanding, especially in your relationship patterns, some people are more tend to the shutdown response and other people are more tend to the defensive arguing response. And both of them were protective mechanisms against shame.
Yes.
And so if the answer is, somebody's coming at me with something like, where'd I put the ketchup in the fridge? I can feel criticized. I can feel not good enough. I can feel like something's wrong with me, which isn't what the partner's saying. It's just how it's reflected in the filter and make you go, okay, I'm done. I'm shut down. I guess I'm a bad person over ketchup, which, we look at the moment and we're like, wait, why did I do that over ketchup? Because it's not you, it's you responding from a little inner child part of you that felt ashamed for getting it wrong. The same way that somebody who has more of an anxious attachment style can get really defensive and, well, I didn't know there was a specific place for the ketchup and get really defensive around it, where the partner's like, wait, what just happened? I was just asking about ketchup, because that inner child is feeling like they have to fight for their place in the world because that's their defense against shame. And so when we don't have a secure attachment, which basically says, I'm me making mistakes in the world and my parents accept me for who I am when I make mistakes, that's more of how a secure attachment is formed. A lot of us didn't get that. And so we can tend to be more avoidant, which shuts down, or more anxious, which gets more defensive. And knowing, some of those traits inside of yourself can help when you're in conflict, because you're able to separate from, like, hold on, this is not the moment. I'm responding to a reaction inside of me, and knowing and really understanding the stories we tell ourselves.
Absolutely.
I think that's a really important part.
Oh, I think you're right. And I think just even noticing that I do this almost every single time that we have a conflict or we begin to have a conflict. When I work with couples or any two people, I really try to validate why they're doing that. I make sense of why they're doing it. If you get really loud and you start to yell or defend yourself, oftentimes, you might have a kiddo that grew up in a big family, and that's the only way they were heard or seen is if they got really loud, right? Or you have, in this case, maybe somebody who never felt emotionally safe around dad, who was very critical, and their instant response is to shut down. So within two people or a couple, I really try to figure that out and say, let's make sense of it. I'm going to help you understand why you're doing that, why this is a protective mechanism, why it worked for you all those years. Then we're going to say, hey, thank you, protective mechanism. Thank you for keeping me safe all those years. And I don't really need you anymore.
Yeah.
Right? Yep.
And I think that takes, it's finessing in conversation too. And having, the ability to be vulnerable, which can be really tough too. Like being able to say to your partner, like, I know this isn't what you're saying to me, but this is how I'm hearing it. And that's a really hard thing to share.
Right.
And it takes really like a good amount of self-assessment to be able to like slow everything down and say, is this about the ketchup or is this about something else?
Right.
And if it's about something else, how do I sit with that for a minute? How do I understand what's actually happening so that I can bring my partner into the world of experiences that I've been through? Because partners want to share in that space. Usually, they don't want to criticize. Most people are very well intended.
Yes, we want to assume positive intent, right? Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And when we can say, instead of, typically what we do, which is react, whether that's through shutdown or through arguing, instead of react, we put space between the emotion and the reaction. And instead we say, okay, I just have to tell you what's happening inside of my body right now, which is very, very brave, but it leads to connection and it gives your partner the opportunity to step into that space and say, tell me more about that.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I love that piece because you want to start to, and this is part of today is we're going to help you learn some new skills and some new language. And even if you say, like Kat said, hey, I'm starting to shut down right now. I want to be with you emotionally. I want to show up for you in this conversation, but I feel like I'm reacting to something that's in my past. It's not right here. I might need a few minutes, or can you hold me for a minute before I can respond to you? I mean, I think just being able to say those things to your partner shifts the entire outcome of that connection or that interaction. It can be a really meaningful, vulnerable, close interaction, or you could go right into a cycle that people do over and over and over again within relationships until they figure out, why am I doing this? And so I want to kind of kick off a little on so I'm trained in EFT, which is emotionally focused therapy, and I use that a lot with couples. And oftentimes we will see like what I consider a pursuer and a withdrawer, and there's no right or wrong. These are just kind of labels that we put on one. So usually a pursuer is like, they can come across as, nagging or bitching or ragging on their partner. And then the withdrawer kind of comes off as like, oh my gosh, you don't even care. You're over there. You're not even responding to me. And that's a pretty typical, stereotypical pattern within two people. And so, oftentimes, if you've got a pursuer and it's like, I want to talk about this right now, they get loud, they get angry. Really what's underneath that is kind of this protest of like, hey, I don't feel important to you. I don't feel like you love me. I don't think you care about me. And then you get the withdrawer who looks like they don't care. They're either they left the conversation, like they're gone in their room, they get in their car and leave. And what's underneath that is typically, I don't feel like I can do anything right. I don't feel good enough for you. You are the one person I want to hit the mark for, and I can't do it. And that sounds like, our writer today, where he just shuts down and he goes to a place of shame, which is what he's hauled along his entire life, right? And so that's what I see a lot with couples or two people. And so again, we really figure out, why am I doing this? Where did this come from? I'll validate it all day long. And then we say, you know what? That's not serving you anymore.
Yeah.
Let's try some new language.
And I think, there's a lot of things that need to be healed through openness and vulnerability and conversation. I also think that there is, in doing a lot of internal family systems or IFS work, there's a lot of reparenting that inner child too, where we can't expect our partners to always say the right thing or never trigger you or understand your childhood trauma and therefore just never upset you. That there is a part of it where it's like, hold on, this isn't about catch up. Something's happening inside of me. Understanding ourselves before we can bring our partner into that world, and understanding that if our partner missteps, which they will because they're imperfect, that we are still able to kind of attune to ourselves in that place and be like, hey, that did feel like criticism. That did feel really hard. That does not mean your partner doesn't value you or care about you. And kind of like giving yourself the nourishing words that you need in that moment. Because, we kind of have this thing where it's like, it doesn't feel the same when we do it for ourselves. It's just not the same as if somebody else does it. And it's like, that's so hard sometimes to hear when people say that, because it's like, yes, it's not the same as another person, but we are allowing somebody else to be the remote control for our happiness when other people don't even know what channel necessarily to tune it to, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good one.
But if we do it to ourselves, it's like, you actually know what that little boy or little girl needs to hear, because you saw the pain that they went through. So when you can, I call it sponge moments with my clients, where I'm like, a sponge soaks up whatever in front of it. And so, if you can, usually we're sponging up stress and anxiety and things that aren't good enough. But if you take a moment and you sponge in, hey, it's okay. It's okay. That was a really hard moment. Like, what do we need right now? And you really nurture that inner child, you'll find a little bit more alignment can come, where you're less triggered over time. So some of that work can be done healing in relationship, but some of it also really is done within our own self and how we truly take in new messaging compared to what we were programmed with in early childhood, which we didn't get to choose.
We didn't get to choose.
Yeah.
Oh, I love all of that, Kat. That was so good. I think I use like this little prickly blue rubber ball. I love tactile stuff. I'm always touching stuff, and I love it so much.
To walk past things in a store and like everything
I've
sensory.
literally set off an alarm at a museum before because I just had to touch this rubber tire on an old-fashioned car. I couldn't help myself. And I just took off running. No, but I think, I use this little prickly rubber ball as, I'm holding this. And, you and I have talked about this before. Who's responsible in those moments, right? Yes, I am responsible for fixing my own parts and for healing those parts. And our partner, there is some responsibility of awareness of our past, awareness of our trauma. They are not responsible to fix it, but there is some responsibility that I love you and I care about you enough that I'm going to do my best not to trigger you in those ways that set you off. Right?
And this takes a lot of work because when you put an anxious and avoidant or a withdrawer and a pursuer together, that sometimes when your partner brings something to you, you can want to defend or you can want to shut down. And it takes a lot of active work against our programming to be like, hold on, my partner's giving me the ball. I don't want to drop the ball. There's something special here, you know, and that's hard when you want to like be like, wait, that's not what I meant. And, you know, I've been guilty of that because I tend to be a little bit more of a pursuer and I have to slow myself down and not always perfectly be like, where are they at and what are they trying to share with me? Because my automatic response is like, hold on, you didn't see me. You don't understand. That's not where I came from. And so just working on our own stories while holding someone else, that can be difficult.
And that's where the vulnerability, I think, is really important too. Even if you say those things out loud, like, listen, I know I feel like I'm going to mess this up. I feel like I'm going to respond in the way that I always have. I don't want to do that. I want to stay connected with you. I need a little bit of time right now so I can show up for you. And it might even be, you know, I'm a big one on calling a timeout. If you need 10 or 15 minutes or even 30, it's okay. And it's sometimes really necessary to say, can I have 10 minutes to kind of process what just happened? And that way I can come back to you healthier and I can be present. You also, like, as a withdrawer, especially if you have like an anxious attachment for, for a partner, you don't want to just say, hey, I'm going to go in the room or I'm going to take a car ride. I'll be back later. You really need to offer reassurance that I will come back to you with that. That's so important. And if you can put a time on it, 15 minutes, all the better. I think that's important within, if you've got an anxious and an avoidant, to let that anxious one know that I promise I will come back. This is important. You're important.
Especially because when we're in partnership with somebody else, without repair, that relationship can really end up going two different directions. And you can have one person like building resentment almost over those kinds of situations, because if the anxious person is just coming, then the other person is like, you're not giving me space. You're making me feel claustrophobic, which can build resentment in the person who kind of needs space. And for the person who needs space, if they never circle back, then the abandonment in the other person is feeling like you don't care about me and we never finished, we never completed anything. And so even though it's hard to go through a conflict cycle, being able to get to a point where it's like, I understand where you were coming from. You understand where I was coming from. Here's what we could do different in the future if this comes up.
Wow. Yeah.
Like that really is like where conflict starts to feel safe.
Oh, yes.
But it takes both people in their different styles of, I'm not going to withdraw, even though that's my go-to. Or if I'm going to withdraw, like you said, I'm going to give it time and I'm going to return and I'm going to do the hard thing, no matter how many breaks. Because, and then for the anxious person to understand, somebody taking breaks does not mean they're abandoning you. It does not mean they don't love you. And it does not mean they don't care. It just means that some people they're not as good at all the words.
Oh, yeah, I know. Yeah. And of course, women, how many words? We say 17 million more words than men do or something like that per day.
It can be a lot.
Right. It's a lot.
I can't imagine what it's like listening to me talk all the time. And somehow people still come see me for therapy.
They still love you. Oh, gosh. Well, I think that's a good part of it, right? And how you show up in a relationship matters and what your narrative is. So like you said, and this is where I love working with people, is we identify it. And then, what are you thinking? When your partner is withdrawn, what meaning of that do you make? And almost always, well, I don't think he or she cares about me. I don't think I'm important.
We personalize versus trying to step into somebody else's shoes. Yeah. What are they experiencing as opposed to always what am I experiencing? And there's a way to take turns. You have to take turns. Yes. But it's like too quickly we jump into our own kind of egoic sense of main character energy and we forget to be like, hold on, they're having a whole experience too, with a whole past that I never experienced, with a whole bunch of curiosity I could bring to it so that I can get out of my own self,
Right.
When they talk about totally random, but when they talk about somebody who has to be public speaking, if you're thinking about what you're going to say and how people are going to receive you and what it's going to be like and you're in your work, it can be very 10 times worse to be on stage.
Yes.
But when you step into everybody else and as our people calm and our people, you think about how this experience might impact them, it just brings a lot more calm to it. It's the same thing in relationships where it's like, if I'm really putting myself in my partner's shoes, then I bring a lot more openness than if I'm thinking how my partner is affecting me and how unfair that is. Well, now I don't really know how to show up because I'm going to stay in protection mode.
I think that's an important point too, because I think honestly, unless we had really super emotionally connected and intelligent parents, which
most of us don't.
Sad news. Then
Sad news.
It's sad. Yeah. Oh, for everybody come in for a group hug. Then I think
I love that.
I know it sounds so warm and fuzzy. I think, if we didn't have that, or we haven't done some therapy or some really good self-reflection and work on ourselves, you can have literally like 2 7-year-old trauma, response kids showing up as adults to have conflict. It's not going to work. Your little traumatized parts are at this table trying to work through something really hard. And unless you know all the parts and you break it down and you have the insight, you're going to continue to do those things over and over again, which is going to continually chip away at the dignity of your relationship. So I don't know what the stat is. I want to say, like couples tend to come in like 5 or 6 years too late, we'll say, quote unquote. I don't know if there is a too late, but tend to be, people tend to come into therapy when like things have been hard for so long and they're worn out and they're burned out. And then, it's like, well, I'm responsible for the content and for the process, but I'm not responsible for the outcome, but I'll work my butt off for you if there's any little thread that keeps you connected. But I would say, I guess, message to anybody listening this, if you are having relational difficulties or even just your own self-worth, questioning that, come in as soon as possible. I mean, like I said, we're 2 therapists, but we're not your therapist. So please find a therapist, find somebody professional that you can connect with to help you through this stuff. Especially, I think about the guy that wrote in here, your self-esteem and your self-worth. I mean, you have looked at yourself through a lens that was created by someone else, right?
Yeah.
And we don't realize how much we are allowing someone else's behavior to dictate how we feel about ourselves.
Yeah, and in conflict, I mean, a couple of my favorite are like the commercial or their statues where it's like 2 adults, but then as they're connecting, there's 2 inner childs on the inside of that statue that are trying to reach for each other while the adults' backs are separated, or where 2 adults are arguing at a table, and as they're arguing, they become these younger versions of themselves. And so, in these moments where it's like you're in a high intensity moment, seeing yourself as really a 5-year-old and seeing your partner as a 5-year-old, it's like if you've been a parent and you look at them and you're like, oh my gosh, I feel bad for that inner child who had to go through those experiences. There's just a lot of vulnerability and connection that makes it easier than when we're in our adult protection mode. Like, you shouldn't be treating me like this. It helps us sink down a little bit too.
Yeah, and I feel like that's where kind of the magic and the connectivity happens in sessions with any 2 people where, we kind of start with, okay, your partner withdraws. Why do you make meaning, or what meaning of that do you make? And typically it's, I just don't think they care about me. Well, what happens when you feel like they don't care about you? I mean, I really help them kind of walk down this staircase of emotional, just emotionality. And at the end of it, typically what happens is there's a lot of, they're activated. There's usually a lot of tears. And, it's, I just feel like maybe I'm 7 or 8 years old and my dad's yelling at me in front of the neighbor kids. And I just don't feel like I can do anything right. And it feels a lot like that. Boy, when your partner sees that level of vulnerability and sadness, oh my gosh. I mean, you just hope that there's enough love and respect and commitment in that relation that should break your partner's heart. I mean, there's never, I'd like to think, always the assumed positive intent that your partner is not intentionally poking at you to bring up those feelings. But that is so often what happens. And when they see that in the office, they're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea when I made a comment as simple as the ketchup that you go back to a place of absolute pain and shame when you were a kid.
Yeah.
Oh man. I mean,
and the way it feels when your partner registers what they clock, what just happened, because the healing that happens when somebody holds you in those moments, it's like every part of your body can soften to like, okay, I'm not overreacting. I'm not a bad person. Like, they see me and they're holding me and I'm safe.
It's so beautiful. And then, you know what? We do that over and over again in the office until you get really good at doing that outside of the office. Yeah. So again, I'm so proud of this guy for writing in today. I know it takes a lot of courage to do that, right? So the fact that you're even asking this question tells me that you're becoming aware of patterns that a lot of people don't even self-reflect or examine. So the responses that you have been learned for a reason, but they don't have have to define you or your future relationship. So awareness creates choice. And guess what? Choice is where the healing starts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'm really proud of you for writing in today. Again, I think this is something a lot of callers are going to resonate with.
And I would say the takeaways from this are, making sure you're understanding the story in your own mind when a trigger comes up, making sure you're communicating what that inner child is experiencing with your partner, and making sure that you're self-soothing in your own self to that story, because that is an experience you've been through, and it doesn't necessarily mean your partner's attacking you, but that inner child does need to know that it's valid to feel what it's feeling and to respond different, and putting space between the emotion and the reaction when it comes to your partner. I think those are some of the things that are just really helpful. And like Kelly said, seeking some therapy services too, just for the fact that when our self-worth and our self-esteem are taken away, it can take extra help or support to be able to build those things back when they were removed from your life.
Yep. Even if, when you sit with the client and, and I say, how true is this? I'm okay just as I am. It's very rarely true. So even if we can slice it really thin and say, I can begin to believe that I'm okay. I can begin to believe that I am worthy. It takes a while to reset that narrative that you've held on to for decades, possibly. So it is hard work, but let me tell you, it's harder sitting in a state of shame and, no self-worth, no self-esteem. You're worthy and deserving of feeling okay just as you are. So I'm so happy you wrote in today. Thanks for being here at the Kitchen Shrink. We're really glad you showed up today. Be kind to yourself and stay connected. We're Kat and Kel, and we're here for you. Real talk, real tools, real life.